make that way new and living. He who enters the kingdom has eternal life already. He shall never perish. But much of this you will the better understand when I shall have returned to the Father, and you are able to view your present experiences in retrospect. And all who heard these blessed words were greatly cheered. The Jewish teachings had been confused and uncertain regarding the survival of the righteous, and it was refreshing and inspiring for Jesus' followers to hear these very definite and positive words of assurance about the eternal survival of all true believers. The apostles continued to preach and baptize believers while they kept up the practice of visiting from house to house, comforting the downcast, and ministering to the sick and afflicted. The apostolic organization was expanded in that each of Jesus' apostles now had one of John's as an associate. Abner was the associate of Andrew, and this plan prevailed until they went down to Jerusalem for the next Passover. The special instruction given by Jesus during their stay at Zebulun had chiefly to do with further discussions of the mutual obligations of the kingdom, and embraced teaching designed to make clear the differences between personal religious experience and the amities of social religious obligations. This was one of the few times the Master ever discussed the social aspects of religion. Throughout his entire earth life, Jesus gave his followers very little instruction regarding the socialization of religion. In Zebulun, the people were of a mixed race, hardly Jew or Gentile, and few of them really believed in Jesus, notwithstanding they had heard of the healing of the sick at Capernaum. 4. The Gospel at Iron. At Iron, as in many of even the smaller cities of Galilee and Judea, there was a synagogue, and during the earlier times of Jesus' ministry, it was his custom to speak in these synagogues on the Sabbath day. Sometimes he would speak at the morning service, and Peter or one of the other apostles would preach at the afternoon hour. Jesus and the apostles would also often teach and preach at the weekday evening assemblies at the synagogue. Although the religious leaders at Jerusalem became increasingly antagonistic toward Jesus, they exercised no direct control over the synagogues outside of that city. It was not until later in Jesus' public ministry that they were able to create such a widespread sentiment against him as to bring about the almost universal closing of the synagogues to his teaching. At this time, all the synagogues of Galilee and Judea were open to him. Iron was the site of extensive mineral mines for those days, and since Jesus had never shared the life of a miner, he spent most of his time while sojourning at Iron in the mines. While the apostles visited the homes and preached in the public places, Jesus worked in the mines with these underground laborers. The fame of Jesus as a healer had spread even to this remote village, and many sick and afflicted sought help at his hands, and many were greatly benefited by his healing ministry. But in none of these cases did the Master perform a so-called miracle of healing, save in that of the leper. Late on the afternoon of the third day at Iron, as Jesus was returning from the mines, he chanced to pass through a narrow side street on his way to his lodging place. As he drew near the squalid hovel of a certain leprous man, the afflicted one, having heard of his fame as a healer, made bold to accost him as he passed his door, saying as he knelt before him, "Lord, if only you would, you could make me clean. I have heard the message of your teachers, and I would enter the kingdom if I could be made clean." And the leper spoke in this way because among the Jews lepers were forbidden even to attend the synagogue or otherwise engage in public worship. This man really believed that he could not be received into the coming kingdom unless he could find a cure for his leprosy. And when Jesus saw him in his affliction and heard his words of clinging faith, his human heart was touched, and the divine mind was moved with compassion. As Jesus looked upon him, the man fell upon his face and worshipped. Then the Master stretched forth his hand and, touching him, said, "I will, be clean." And immediately he was healed. The leprosy no longer afflicted him. When Jesus had lifted the man upon his feet, he charged him, "See that you tell no man about your healing, but rather go quietly about your business, showing yourself to the priest, and offering those sacrifices commanded by Moses in testimony of your cleansing." But this man did not do as Jesus had instructed him. Instead, he began to publish abroad throughout the town that Jesus had cured his leprosy, and since he was known to all the village, the people could plainly see that he had been cleansed of his disease. He did not go to the priests as Jesus had admonished him. As a result of his spreading abroad the news that Jesus had healed him, the Master was so thronged by the sick that he was forced to rise early the next day and leave the village. Although Jesus did not again enter the town, he remained 2 days in the outskirts near the mines, continuing to instruct the believing miners further regarding the gospel of the kingdom. This cleansing of the leper was the first so-called miracle which Jesus had intentionally and deliberately performed up to this time, and this was a case of real leprosy. From Iron they went to Gischala, spending 2 days proclaiming the gospel, and then departed for Chorazin, where they spent almost a week preaching the good news. But they were unable to win many believers for the kingdom in Chorazin. In no place where Jesus had taught had he met with such a general rejection of his message. The sojourn at Chorazin was very depressing to most of the apostles, and Andrew and Abner had much difficulty in upholding the courage of their associates. And so, passing quietly through Capernaum, they went on to the village of Madon, where they fared little better. There prevailed in the minds of most of the apostles the idea that their failure to meet with success in these towns so recently visited was due to Jesus' insistence that they refrain in their teaching and preaching from referring to him as a healer. How they wished he would cleanse another leper, or in some other manner so manifest his power as to attract the attention of the people. But the Master was unmoved by their earnest urging. 5. Back in Cana. The apostolic party was greatly cheered when Jesus announced, "Tomorrow we go to Cana." They knew they would have a sympathetic hearing at Cana, for Jesus was well known there. They were doing well with their work of bringing people into the kingdom when, on the 3rd day, there arrived in Cana a certain prominent citizen of Capernaum, Titus, who was a partial believer and whose son was critically ill. He heard that Jesus was at Cana, so he hastened over to see him. The believers at Capernaum thought Jesus could heal any sickness. When this nobleman had located Jesus in Cana, he besought him to hurry over to Capernaum and heal his afflicted son. While the apostles stood by in breathless expectancy, Jesus, looking at the father of the sick boy, said, "How long shall I bear with you? The power of God is in your midst, but except you see signs and behold wonders, you refuse to believe." But the nobleman pleaded with Jesus, saying, "My Lord, I do believe, but come ere my child perishes, for when I left him he was even then at the point of death." And when Jesus had bowed his head a moment in silent meditation, he suddenly spoke, "Return to your home, your son will live." Titus believed the word of Jesus and hastened back to Capernaum. And as he was returning, his servants came out to meet him, saying, "Rejoice, for your son is improved, he lives." Then Titus inquired of them at what hour the boy began to mend, and when the servants answered, "Yesterday, about the 7th hour, the fever left him," the father recalled that it was at about that hour when Jesus had said, "Your son will live." And Titus henceforth believed with a whole heart, and all his family also believed. This son became a mighty minister of the kingdom, and later yielded up his life with those who suffered in Rome. Though the entire household of Titus, their friends, and even the apostles regarded this episode as a miracle, it was not. At least this was not a miracle of curing physical disease. It was merely a case of pre-knowledge concerning the course of natural law, just such knowledge as Jesus frequently resorted to subsequent to his baptism. Again was Jesus compelled to hasten away from Cana because of the undue attention attracted by the second episode of this sort to attend his ministry in this village. The townspeople remembered the water and the wine, and now that he was supposed to have healed the nobleman's son at so great a distance, they came to him not only bringing the sick and afflicted, but also sending messengers requesting that he heal sufferers at a distance. And when Jesus saw that the whole countryside was aroused, he said, "Let us go to Nain." 6. Nain and the widow's son. These people believed in signs. They were a wonder-seeking generation. By this time, the people of central and southern Galilee had become miracle-minded regarding Jesus and his personal ministry. Scores, hundreds of honest persons suffering from purely nervous disorders and afflicted with emotional disturbances came into Jesus' presence and then returned home to their friends announcing that Jesus had healed them. And such cases of mental healing these ignorant and simple-minded people regarded as physical healing, miraculous cures. When Jesus sought to leave Cana and go to Nain, A great multitude of believers and many curious people followed